Have you ever wondered why some people simply don't post photos of themselves on social media? Why, in a world where sharing every moment seems the norm, do some people choose to remain invisible in the digital universe? This question may seem trivial at first glance, but when examined through the lens of Kantian philosophy, it reveals deep layers about our relationship with technology, identity, and morality. Many of us feel a silent, almost imperceptible pressure to document and share our lives, as if a moment doesn't truly exist unless it's photographed, filtered, and posted for approval. This culture of constant visibility places us in a state of performative consciousness that Kant, centuries before the Internet, had already identified as a distancing from true moral autonomy. The Prussian philosopher's concepts may seem too distant and abstract to apply to our digital reality, creating a barrier between his revolutionary thinking and our everyday experience. Perhaps you've felt that uneasiness when you decide not to post a photo of yourself with friends, as if you're breaking an unwritten social contract. Or perhaps you've experienced that feeling of inadequacy when comparing your undocumented life with the carefully curated highlights of online acquaintances. By the end of this reflection, you'll have a deeper understanding not only of the decision to remain invisible on social media, but also of how Kantian principles of autonomy and dignity can fundamentally transform your relationship with technology and your own image. This isn't just a philosophical analysis, but an invitation to a more conscious and authentic way of existing in a world increasingly mediated by screens and algorithms. When Kant developed his concept of the categorical imperative, proposing that we should act only according to that maxim by which we can will it to become a universal law, he certainly didn't envision a world of selfies and likes. However, his moral philosophy offers a surprisingly relevant lens for analyzing the phenomenon of people who choose not to post their images online. The categorical imperative invites us to reflect. If everyone acted like me, turning every private moment into public, transforming every experience into content for others to consume, what kind of society would we have? People who choose visual privacy on social media are often unconsciously applying a fundamental Kantian principle. They refuse to treat their image as a means to social validation, thus preserving their dignity as an end in itself. This is the essence of the second Kantian imperative: to treat humanity, both in oneself and in the person of others, always as an end, never as a means. When we decide not to transform our image into a commodity for digital consumption, we are affirming our humanity in a silent but powerful way. It's important to note that Kant wouldn't condemn the act of sharing photos per se, but he would question the intention behind it. If we post out of a desire for external approval, we are, in a sense, abandoning our moral autonomy and acting out of inclination, not duty. Autonomy, for Kant, means acting according to principles that arise from reason, not from external impulses or desires. I'm going to pause here and ask you directly, how many times have you felt lost trying to connect Kant's philosophical concepts with your own digital existence? That feeling that there's something profound to understand about our online presence, but that somehow remains just out of reach? You're not alone. Many of us carry this quiet restlessness, this desire to truly understand the fundamental questions our social media lives pose. I'd love for you to share your experience in the comments. It could be something simple like, "My biggest struggle balancing privacy and online connection is..." Jalen. Your comment not only helps me create content more tailored to your real needs, but it also creates a community where others, who may be facing the same obstacles as you, can feel understood and less alone in their philosophical journey. It's through this honest exchange that we grow together. So please, pause the video for a moment and share your experience. Your voice matters more than you know. Psychology reveals that those who choose not to post their photos on social media often share particular characteristics. Studies show that these people tend to value intrinsic motivation, that which comes from within, rather than external validation. They derive their self-esteem from personal values, real achievements, and close relationships. From a Kantian perspective, we can interpret this as a manifestation of goodwill, acting out of duty rather than inclination. Goodwill, for Kant, is the only thing that can be considered good without qualification. It is not good because of its results or because it garners social approval, but is good in itself. People who resist the pressure to constantly document their appearance and activities are, in a sense, exercising their goodwill in a digital context. They choose to act based on principles, not in the pursuit of immediate rewards such as likes and comments. Another common characteristic of these people is a strong inclination toward introspection, which Kant greatly valued. Instead of directing their attention outward to how they are perceived by others, they turn their gaze inward, reflecting on their own thoughts and values. This private self-awareness, as opposed to public self-awareness, allows for a more authentic development of moral character. For Kant, true morality arises when we act out of duty, following universalizable principles discovered through reason. This process requires constant internal reflection, something that can be hindered by the constant distraction of social media. It's fascinating to observe how Kant's distinction between autonomy and heteronomy manifests itself in digital behavior. Moral autonomy, for Kant, occurs when we act according to laws we give ourselves through our reason. Heteronomy, on the other hand, occurs when our actions are determined by forces external to us. In the context of social media, we can see a clear tension between these two states. Those who shape their lives and appearance to gain online approval are, from a Kantian perspective, in a state of heteronomy. Their choices are influenced not by universalizable principles derived from reason, but by the desire for external validation. In contrast, those who maintain their visual privacy are exercising a form of moral autonomy. They decide for themselves which aspects of their lives should be shared, basing their choices on internal principles rather than social pressure. This autonomy manifests as a form of freedom. For Kant, freedom is not simply doing what we want, but acting according to moral principles we consciously choose. On social media, this can mean the freedom to opt out of the constant cycle of exposure and validation, the freedom to exist without documenting, the freedom to live moments that remain private and therefore, in some ways, more authentically ours. Kant developed the concept of the kingdom of ends, an ideal community where all rational beings treat each other as ends in themselves, never as means. This concept can help us imagine a healthier relationship with social media. When we transform our image into content for consumption, when we shape our experiences to be Instagrammable, we are potentially reducing ourselves to means to validation. We are objectifying ourselves. People who choose not to post photos may be intuitively resisting this objectification, preserving their integrity as ends in themselves. This doesn't mean they are completely isolated. Many continue to consume content online, learning, observing, even interacting in limited ways. What psychologists call passive participation may actually be a more conscious and selective form of engagement. The issue here is not a total rejection of technology or the social connection it enables, but a refusal to uncritically submit to its implicit demands. This stance reflects what Kant called intellectual majority. In his essay, What is Enlightenment? The ability to think for oneself without the guidance of others. In the current context, we could say that reaching digital majority means using social media consciously, according to one's own principles, rather than being used by them. A particularly relevant aspect of Kantian philosophy for our discussion is its insistence on the universality of moral principles. According to Kant, for a maxim to be morally valid, it must be universalizable without contradiction. This leads us to an intriguing reflection. If everyone decided to post every moment of their lives, transforming every experience into content for others to consume, would this be sustainable? Or would it create a world where authenticity would become impossible, where every action would be performed not for its intrinsic value, but for its potential to generate online engagement? There is an implicit contradiction here, similar to Kant's example of the false promise. Just as a world where everyone made false promises would render the very institution of the promise unviable, a world where every moment is performed for a digital audience could destroy the possibility of genuine experiences. People who choose not to post their photos are perhaps preserving a space for the authentic in an increasingly performative world. They keep alive the possibility of acting without an outside gaze, of existing without documenting, of being without appearing. This choice, seen through a Kantian lens, is not just a personal preference, but potentially a universalizable moral principle. The assertion that not everything needs to be visible to have value, that human dignity also resides in what we choose to keep private. Kantian practical reason, the one that guides us in moral matters, demands that we act in such a way that our maxims can be universal laws. When we apply this principle to the issue of online exposure, interesting considerations emerge. Consider the implications of treating your own image as a means to obtain validation. If everyone did this consistently, we would end up creating a society where human worth is intrinsically linked to the ability to generate visual engagement. This contradicts the Kantian notion that human beings have dignity, not price, that is, that their value is intrinsic, not contingent on external factors such as appearance or popularity. The growing psychological evidence on the negative impacts of social comparison on social media suggests that there may be something fundamentally problematic in a system that encourages us to constantly evaluate our appearance in relation to others. Those who refrain from posting are, consciously or unconsciously, resisting this system. They are applying a form of Kantian practical reason, questioning whether the maxim, "I must transform my image into content to obtain validation," can truly be universalized without contradiction. The answer, when we consider the documented psychological effects of constant exposure, seems to be negative. This perspective doesn't aim to judge individual photo posters, but rather to question the system that normalizes and even demands this practice, treating abstinence as an anomaly to be explained. An additional consideration from the Kantian perspective involves the distinction between public and private personhood. Kant recognized the importance of both dimensions of human existence, but also valued clear boundaries between them. The philosopher argued that certain aspects of our lives and thoughts belong in the private sphere, where we can freely explore ideas without the pressure of immediate public judgment. This distinction becomes increasingly blurred in the age of social media, where we are encouraged to transform even our most intimate moments into public content. People who resist this pressure are, in a sense, preserving the integrity of the private sphere, which Kant considered essential for intellectual and moral development. Recent psychological studies corroborate this view, suggesting that those who maintain greater privacy online tend to experience less social anxiety and greater satisfaction with their real lives. They appear less vulnerable to the cycle of social comparison and external validation that often accompanies heavy social media use. This does not mean that they are necessarily more moral or superior, but it does indicate that their choice may offer certain psychological benefits that align with what Kant valued: autonomy, independent reflection, and an identity that does not depend primarily on the gaze of others. The categorical imperative asks us to act in a way that treats humanity, both in ourselves and in others, always as an end, never merely as a means. When we apply this principle to the issue of online exposure, profound considerations emerge. Constantly posting photos of oneself can, in certain contexts, reflect an instrumentalization of one's own being, transforming it into a means to obtain validation. This contradicts the Kantian dignity that we all intrinsically possess. Conversely, the decision not to post can represent an affirmation of that dignity, a refusal to reduce oneself to an object for visual consumption. It is important to clarify that Kant would not necessarily condemn the act of sharing images per se. The crucial question is the intention behind this sharing. If we post out of duty, for example, to maintain genuine connections with distant loved ones, this would be morally different from posting out of inclination, seeking validation or status. Herein lies a subtle but important distinction in Kantian philosophy: the difference between acting in accordance with duty and acting from duty. Many of us post photos to conform to social expectations, but few perhaps do so out of a genuine sense of moral duty. Those who choose visual privacy may intuitively reject actions that would merely conform to external expectations, seeking instead a more autonomous existence, guided by internal principles rather than social pressures. It's fascinating to consider how Kant's notion of publicity, the principle that morally defensible actions should be able to be made public without contradiction, applies to the digital age. Kant argued that any action that needs to be kept secret to function is likely immoral. This might initially suggest that greater transparency online would always be preferable. However, there is a crucial difference between able to be made public and ought to be made public. Kantian philosophy doesn't require that we make every aspect of our lives visible, only that our actions be such that we would have no moral reason to hide them if they were revealed. People who choose not to post their photos on social media aren't necessarily hiding something immoral. They are simply exercising their right to determine the limits of their exposure. They are asserting that certain aspects of human existence are valuable precisely because they remain private, not because we have something to hide, but because privacy itself has value. This stance reflects Kantian respect for moral autonomy, for each individual's ability to determine for themselves which aspects of their life should be shared and which should remain personal. In a world that increasingly equates visibility with existence, this may be one of the most radical forms of self-affirmation. As we delve deeper into our Kantian analysis of online privacy choices, it's important to consider the concept of the kingdom of ends we mentioned earlier. This concept represents an ideal community where all rational beings are treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means. On social media, we often observe an instrumentalization not only of oneself, but also of others. Friends, family, and even strangers are transformed into audiences, into means to validate our digital existence. Those who choose not to participate in this system are, in a sense, rejecting this mutual instrumentalization. They are seeking more direct relationships, unmediated by likes and comments, where the other is valued for themselves and not for their ability to provide validation. This choice reflects Kantian respect for the inherent dignity of every human being. It's important to emphasize that this analysis is not intended to demonize social media or those who actively use it. Technology itself is not inherently problematic in the Kantian view. What matters is how we use it. It is possible to use digital platforms in ways that respect human dignity, that treat others as ends, not means. The challenge lies in developing a conscious and critical relationship with these tools, using them in ways that promote rather than diminish our moral autonomy. As we conclude this reflection on the Kantian psychology of those who don't post photos on social media, some valuable insights emerge. Kant's philosophy, developed centuries before the digital age, offers surprisingly powerful conceptual tools for analyzing our relationships with technology. The categorical imperative invites us to question whether our digital practices could be universalized without contradiction. Kant's emphasis on human dignity reminds us that we have intrinsic value, independent of our ability to generate online engagement, and his concept of moral autonomy encourages us to use technology consciously, according to our own principles, rather than being used by it. People who choose not to post their photos on social media are not necessarily more moral or superior, but their choice may reflect, consciously or unconsciously, some fundamental Kantian principles. They are exercising their autonomy, preserving their dignity as ends in themselves, and implicitly questioning a system that often reduces human beings to objects for visual consumption. In a world where we are constantly encouraged to document and share every aspect of our lives, the decision to keep certain aspects private can be one of the most authentic forms of self-affirmation. As Kant might say, it is a manifestation of digital adulthood. The ability to use these tools according to one's own principles, without being uncritically directed by their implicit demands. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the complexities of philosophical thought in the digital world, know that you're not alone. The path to understanding Kant and his application to social media doesn't have to be lonely or confusing. I invite you to subscribe to the channel and join this community of people who, like you, seek clarity amidst the maelstrom of fragmented information about philosophy and technology. By subscribing, you'll receive weekly reflections that transform seemingly inaccessible concepts into practical insights for your digital life. We're not just studying philosophy. We're learning to think more deeply about our online choices, to more wisely question the systems that shape our digital existence, and to live more purposefully in a world mediated by algorithms. Click the subscribe button now, not as an obligation, but as a gift for your own intellectual development. And if this content brought you any clarity today, please leave a like as a way to say we're together in this quest for true knowledge. Remember, understanding Kant isn't just an academic exercise. It's a way to awaken to a more conscious and authentic digital existence, where your privacy choices reflect not insecurity, but a powerful affirmation of your human dignity.